Hello and welcome to a new episode of Fit Life Journeys, a podcast where we discuss the truth about living a fit and healthy lifestyle, break down some myths, and share the stories of real people in service of education and empowerment. Now, on this episode of Fit Life Journeys, I've got a little spin on things. I'm not talking to one of our Fit Life gym members or coaches. I'm talking with Dr. Ruston Tippetts from Pinnacle Chiropractic today. And we're going to talk a little bit about, keeping your body feeling good and injury-free. Those are important aspects of a fit life. So Ruston and I are going to chat about some different methods to help you feel and move your best, which I would say is probably a large part of your goal in chiropractics, right?
100%.
All right, cool. So for starters, I always like to ask people like what their journey is and how they got into kind of health and fitness. Now yours might be a little different into chiropractics versus coaching. But I know you also have some coaching experience too. So.
Right. Yeah. So I guess my initial interest in not only fitness and training, but just biology, anatomy in general started when I was a kid. I had almost an unhealthy obsession with animals, like anything to do with animal life. My parents would catch me up late at night reading like animal encyclopedias. Like I was obsessed. So, and it just fascinated me how life in general works and how adaptable things are. And then my dad was in the military. He was an infantry officer for about 8 to 10 years, and he retired as a captain there. And so as a kid, if I didn't do my chores, I did push-ups as punishment. And if I left my light on, the light may not be there when I got back later, but also I did dying cockroach, which is like a variation of like dead bugs. So as a kid, like, I figured out, okay, well, if that's what's going to happen when I don't listen, which I could have just listened, that's the easy route, but of course that didn't happen. So I figured out, okay, well, if I do those movements in my downtime, I can get good at those. And then it's not really a punishment, it's more like a game. And I can remember, I'm one of 6 kids, so came from a large family. And I remember, so we would have competitions about who could do dead bugs the longest. And so it kind of became a game. So that initial interest in biology and then being kind of like not forced, but I figured out I enjoyed doing that type of thing. I used to challenge all my dad's buddies to push-up contests as a kid. Like I'm this 8-9-year-old kid, like I bet I could do more push-ups than you. So, but then that led into a little bit more interest in fitness in general. I actually started just training friends of mine when I was like 13, 14, 15 years old.
Oh, wow.
Because I knew a little bit more than they did. I didn't know much. I was watching like YouTube videos and I learned a few things, mostly calisthenic stuff. So it was all like body weight stuff, which is easy when you're weighing 110 pounds. Right. Push-ups, pull-ups are easy. Yeah. So that kind of led into, as a teenager, my younger sister was diagnosed with Crohn's disease when she was like 12. And it was actually a chiropractor at the time who had a little bit of background in nutrition and other, things besides just chiropractic care. And he helped her completely manage her symptoms without needing medication. She's never had surgery or anything. So those are like the big things that when I look back, those are big turning points for me. I always had an interest in biology and just, not necessarily human anatomy at the time, but animals and how cool they were. And then getting into fitness through my dad with the military and just kind of being around that culture. And then finally my sister going through that experience. And I actually have an uncle who's a chiropractor as well. So I kind of knew a little bit about it, but that experience kind of pushed me in that direction. And so that was kind of combo of things. I knew I wanted to do something medical related. I ended up being a personal trainer for about 7 years in undergrad and then in grad school as well. But I knew I wanted to do something involving the human body because I just thought it was amazing and fascinating. And I'd already been passionate about fitness, but I knew early on that I didn't want to ever work in a hospital. And I didn't want to be on call because I just didn't sound enjoyable to me. So that kind of all came together for chiropractic school, and we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, I'm sure. But the whole idea about chiropractic care is that we have this saying, and we say like the power that made the body heals the body, which is essentially just this idea that like when you get a cut, like you hurt yourself, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to do anything. The body heals, right? And so eventually it gets to the point where you don't even know it's there. So the basic idea of chiropractic and what we do is that the body's pretty smart. It's pretty adaptable. And as long as you take care of it, it will mostly do its job really, really well. Now, obviously, there's people who have like genetic disorders, some stuff goes wrong all the time. But for the most part, my philosophy and why I do what I do is just I want to help people feel good and be able to do the things that they would like to without having to stress out about, oh, well, I'm going to hurt myself, or I don't know, can I even walk that far? Can I go do this activity? Can I do this with my family? Can I have this hobby? Because their body holds them back. And I don't ever want that to be a reality for people. So,
I mean, that's kind of the same thing we do here. I mean, I know a lot of people come for weight loss, but there's also the, like, I want to be able to play with my kids. We have an older coach who he can get down on the floor and play with his grandkids, and not all the grandparents can. Hikes, all that sort of thing. It's the same thing. Like, people need to find some place to help them treat their body the way that it needs to be treated to do the things it's supposed to do.
Right, 100%. And I try and sometimes I get people that they're like hyper focused on pain, and you have to get them to like look a step further. Like, it's not just about getting out of pain, or like, I'm sure you have people that they're like, well, I know I should exercise, so I come here and I exercise. It's like, well, you need to have some sort of goal beyond that. Like, what's the reason you're doing things? And if you can have something solid in your mind that's why you're doing what you're doing, I feel like it's so much more beneficial too. So,
right, because otherwise, when it gets hard or you get uncomfortable, it's really hard to keep doing the thing.
Yeah, just because I have to, or because I feel like I should, is not a very strong motivating influence.
So kind of the first thing that I want to do with you is kind of dispel some myths about chiropractics, because I have all sorts of fun beliefs from when I was growing up that I will tell you. Well, because my dad went to a chiropractor at least once a month, maybe more often than that. So I was convinced growing up that all chiropractors do is fix you just well enough for you to last a couple of weeks and then need to come back, right? They're just adjusting you in a way that's going to slide back so that they keep having to come and get your money every month.
Right.
So is that true?
So the short answer is no.
Tell me the truth, Ruston.
The short answer is no. The long answer, I'll try and keep shorter, so that's not all we're talking about. But that is a very common perception of chiropractic, and that really stems from a misunderstanding of what it is that we do. So I'll try and give like the really basis. What chiropractic is allowing the body to work the way it's intended. Okay. And I'll try and I won't go too far into philosophy, but basically, like, a lot of people think of chiropractors as we crack people. We're back doctors. I have neck pain. I have low back pain. Well, that is part of what we do. Chiropractic care essentially focuses on the brain, and the spinal cord is what controls the entire body. That is the information highway that controls everything. Hormones are all signaled from the brain and the spinal cord, everything. They're just controlled from there. So really, chiropractors are supposed to be like neurologists essentially, but like a natural version of it. And so when we do adjustments is the technical term. Manipulations is what like PTs call it. The lay person calls it getting cracked.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is we're trying to allow the nervous system to function optimally. And if you have areas of dysfunction that are either malpositioned or that are not moving the way that they should, that can put pressure on the nervous system, and then the nervous system suffers, so the body suffers. Okay. So that's like the basics of what we do in a nutshell. And the things that generally tend to affect the body, and this applies to everything, not just chiropractic, but we kind of have narrowed it down to three things. We call them thoughts, traumas, toxins. Thoughts implies mental attitude and outlook, and we've actually found, studies show now that depending on your mood, you can change your biophysiology, you can change hormonal concentrations of things like cortisol and other things, just based on your mood.
My therapist always tells me to stop swearing at my body. She's like, it can hear you. Stop complaining about it. It can hear you.
Right. Yeah, there's practitioners that exclusively focus on that. In fact, one of my sisters does something called Body Talk that is like 100% just about positive outlook, and not just positivity, but like controlling the way that you think about your body. Yeah. And so there's a whole, that's like its own realm. But so thoughts encompasses that, and then traumas. Basically, we don't mean like trauma like a car accident or an injury. We mean life in and of itself is fairly stressful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've got gravity all the time is a force. And then, I mean, just wear and tear from life being life. Like pretty much as soon as you hit 25, like it's sad to say it's kind of downhill from there. Like purely because that's when we have found that bone density is at its peak, disc height is at its peak, just, hormonally we start to change after that. And not everyone's the same, obviously. And what you do to take care of your body has a large impact on that.
Sure.
But life is what it is. You do stupid stuff all the time. You stub your toe, you trip, you overdo it at the gym. Like there's just things that you do all the time. So trauma encompasses anything physical that you have done to yourself. Okay. And then toxins is talking about environmental factors like air quality, water, your diet is a huge part. So anything that's environmental, anything you put in your body, anything you're around for long periods of time falls into that. So those three things are constantly at play. Mm-hmm. And so the reason why chiropractors, initially, if you come to us with a problem, we're going to see you more often up front because we need to make progress, right? Like chiropractic care is not like a magic trick. We're helping your body function just a little bit better. So we do see you more often up front. And then we call it wellness care. And I hope no one has ever, and unfortunately I know this has happened, I hope no one has ever been scared and has used fear tactics by any doctor, really, but especially a chiropractor, because that's what I am, but into thinking, oh, well, if you don't keep coming, this is going to go back to the way it was. Like, this is going to be terrible. You could have X, Y, Z happen to you if you do not continue to come every month. This terrible thing's going to happen. And I know people have heard that, and I'm hoping that's not as prevalent in the field. I've heard that more often in the past. But so basically it's like, okay, we've gotten you to the point where we're both happy with how you're feeling. That's kind of the end goal. And then after that, we do suggest coming in every a certain amount of time for preventative care more than anything, just to make sure everything is functioning well, check up on how you're doing. We usually tell people the sweet spot for that is somewhere between 4 to 8 weeks. But that being said, I know people that come in once a year, twice a year, and we love it when people come in. I haven't seen them in like 6 months. They're like, hey, I still feel great. I'm just coming in to get checked up on. Kind of give you the update. This is what's been going on in my life. This is what I've done. I did have this one thing for like 2 days that kind of bothered me, but then it went on its own, so I'm fine. Like stuff like that. We're totally ecstatic when we hear those types of things. People are still good, but chiropractic care is not intended to be a fear tactic where we're like, or like you said, where it's like, we're going to get you just good enough you feel better, but not good enough so that you never have a problem again. That's not what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, obviously I thought that when I was a kid, and I've grown since then. And honestly, as you're talking, it's like, again, it's the same thing here. There's this one ad that keeps coming up on my Facebook, and it's like, this woman's like, no matter how much I eat right and exercise, as soon as I stop, the weight comes back on. And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's so it's kind of the same thing, right? Like you have to keep doing the things that put you in a good position. And if you stop doing them, then you shouldn't expect to keep getting the results.
Right. 100%. And I hate it too when chiropractors are seen as a crutch, where it's like, I can do whatever I want. And if something hurts, I'll just go in and get it fixed, and then I'm good to go again. Like, you're supposed to take care of yourself, and the more you do on your own, the less you need us, right? Like, the better you take care of yourself, the less often I would want to see you, much less expect you to come in. So people do kind of like, okay, well, I'll just not take care of myself. I'll come in. You guys will fix me up for another 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Like, unless you have something very wrong that it's like, look, like we're just trying to keep you out of being miserable. And we do have people that come in every 2 to 3 weeks. And usually those people that are like with disabilities that insurance has agreed that long-term care just to keep them comfortable is appropriate. But unless you have that, like, I don't want to see you every 2 weeks. Like, that tells me you're not doing what you're supposed to. And so I'd much rather you just take care of yourself. So.
I'm sure there are other chiropractic myths besides just that one, but, or you're not a real doctor. Has anyone ever told you that?
I can't even count the number of times I've been told that. So
you're like, I didn't know I was coming here to get picked on today.
No. I mean, I hear these things all the time anyway. So we are doctors. There are 3 degrees that like qualify you to be called a portal of entry provider is what it's called, or like a PCP. Okay. So a medical doctor, a doctor of osteopathy, so a DO, or technically doctor of osteopathic medicine, and then a doctor of chiropractic are the only three that in every state you can go to without a referral script of any kind.
Okay.
And we can then see you. We're qualified to do an exam to actually give you diagnosis, like actual, this is what you have, to order imaging, whether it be x-rays, MRIs, order blood work, that type of thing. So we are doctors. Our training for the first year is actually exactly the same as a med school student.
Okay.
It's 100% anatomy, physiology, chemistry, biochemistry. We spend a lot less time on pharmaceuticals because we don't prescribe medicine.
Okay.
Yeah, that is one thing. We do not prescribe medications. I've only had once or twice where people came in trying to get a script renewed for something. We don't do that. I don't really care if people see me as a doctor or not. I do care that people think we're full of crap and that we don't have medical training. Like, that's not okay with me because that's definitely not true. Because the breakdown, and you can actually, there are graphs out there. If you just like Google like graph showing chiropractic hours versus med school student hours, they actually break it down like pie charts of what we spend our time doing in school. And we actually spend more time talking about nutrition, exercise. We spend more time looking at x-rays and then obviously we do adjustments rather than pharmaceuticals. So the intervention is different, but we actually spend more time on functional type medicine that's just focused on overall health than MDs do. So
I have two more questions coming out of that answer. First off is the one thing, like, people think of chiropractors as the bone doctors, which I know is, largely, but I know you also, like, there's, like, you can also tell, like, when muscles are the problem or whatever. So it's not just bones in and of themselves, right?
Yes. So our role as chiropractors, because like I said, ideally, we're talking about, like, nervous system function, musculoskeletal health, all that fun stuff. Insurance has played a large role in determining. Yeah, right. Of course. Insurance. Don't even get me started. Insurance has decided that we are musculoskeletal doctors.
Okay.
And so they will allow us to do joint manipulations, adjustments is what we call them. They allow us to do soft tissue work. They allow us to do rehab. But a lot of the things that we actually do, they don't necessarily recognize. So if you look at, if you just Google what does a chiropractor do, they're going to tell you, like, oh, they're great for neck pain, low back pain, like muscle stuff. So, and to be fair, I will say that every chiropractor is slightly different, right? Because we fall under like alternative medicine. And so there are about, I think there's like 15, 16 chiropractic schools in the country. And depending on where you graduate from, depending on like what you specialized in, your focus could be very different. So part of, I feel like that's another, not myth, but unfortunate thing that has come from chiropractic is that people are like, well, I went to this one chiropractor and he was an absolute like quack. Like, he was a weirdo. Like, they can be very different. So part of it is like, what is your expectation going in, and where did this person like graduate from?
Titled alternative medicine, I don't know if that gives you any favors.
No, it doesn't, because we also get like thrown in with like, and not to say anything bad about any other practitioner or whatever, I try never to do that, but we get thrown in sometimes with like energy people, and because if you actually look, the founder of chiropractic, D.D. Palmer, he started out as a magnets and energy healing, which was very big going on in like the mid to late 1800s. That was like a really big thing that was coming on, mostly from like Eastern medicine influence. And then he founded chiropractic, which, in our defense, spinal manipulation has been going on for forever, because you can actually find Egyptian hieroglyphics that talk about spinal manipulation. So, because it's kind of a no-brainer. Like, people probably realized very early on, probably unfortunately from hurting each other, that the head, the heart, and the spine are kind of important things. Yeah. So you don't want to damage those. So it's been going on for a long time. But I will say there are lots of different chiropractors. There's lots of different philosophies out there. They all focus on different things. So it is very important to know, what does that doctor do before you go to them? Because if you go to them with, I sprained my ankle, or I have low back pain that is worse when I exercise, or something like that, and you go in and all they talk about is nutrition, or how you should only eat Himalayan pink sea salt instead of regular sea salt, or instead of regular iodized like table salt, which I remember that because you told me that happened to you. So
it's fair point, but I don't need 10 minutes of it at my chiropractic appointment.
So if you go in with an expectation that I want help with my musculoskeletal pain, and that's all they talk about, you're going to be like, what the heck is wrong with this guy? Like, I didn't ask for that. I didn't need that. So we cover a very wide range of topics because there are less, I guess, lines for us. There's less restrictions because we fall under alternative medicine. So you could get something not what you're expecting.
So my other question, because you said that you get more like nutrition studies than the doctors in med school, which from my own nutrition studies, I can tell you that a lot of times what doctors think is good nutrition advice is kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
What exactly, is that, why is that part of chiropractics, and how do you use it, if at all?
Yeah. So it's a big part of what we do because, again, we believe that everything that you do to the body, any input, you're going to get a result from that, right? And so we are very much so pro get your nutrients when at all possible from whole foods. Like, we do talk about supplementation, and lots of chiropractors carry supplements because the harsh reality is that people are either too lazy or do not have access to good nutrition all the time. Like, they just either don't know what to do, or they don't live somewhere where they can get access to fruit, like fresh fruits and vegetables and all that stuff. But we are very pro give the body what it needs in order to function optimally. And so we get a lot of training on how to recognize deficiencies in people, when to order blood work, because we're like, hey, like, you may have, like, for example, in older people, they have a very hard time getting enough vitamin B12 because their stomach acid actually loses potency as you get older. And there's something called intrinsic factor. And if your stomach acid does not work correctly and you don't have intrinsic factor, you don't absorb B12 that you eat, period. It's impossible. So that's why a lot of older people end up getting B12 injections, because even if you supplement it, they can't absorb it. So things like that. Like, there are things that show up as weird symptoms that are actually nutritionally related. So we get a lot of training on how to recognize deficiencies, insufficiencies, when supplementation is necessary. But also, I mean, if we're talking about musculoskeletal stuff, obviously, like, being significantly overweight can be hard on your back. And so we very regularly do weight consultations. We talk about nutrition with people that, mostly for people that don't know anything. They just have no clue. Like, I will say, if you have some sort of weird allergy or disorder, I'm probably not the chiropractor to talk to, because I don't spend as much time with that. But I do know all of the basics about what you should and should not be eating. Like, that's why a lot of our training focuses on that, is because we believe it's a huge part of it. So,
no, that makes sense. The one thing, because obviously here we deal with weight loss so much, and people get so focused on eating to lose weight that they don't think about the nutrients and whatever. Like, I've seen people who eat keto, or like, why are you eating vegetables? You don't even need those. And it's like, there's actually another point for those that has nothing to do with, the weight loss. There's good stuff in there.
Right. Yeah. I'm not a fan of fad diets. I just think a lot of them are stupid. Because I mean, I understand you have to look down and say, like, what is the goal, right? And if your goal is, right now, I'm focusing on weight loss, and you find something that works for you, okay, cool, go for it. But I do not agree with the long-term, well, you should never eat this, period, like, never. I'm like, well, that, first of all, that's a very broad, vague statement. That's a very large blanket of population. Like, what works for you necessarily isn't what's best for another person, which most of us are more similar than we are different. Obviously, like, the human body is not that different person to person. But a lot of it just comes down to, like, what works for you. But eating for health is totally different than eating for weight loss, because I'm sorry, even if you don't believe this, there are minerals and vitamins and phytochemicals and all kinds of stuff in foods that you need. Like, it's just a fact. So,
carbs are actually necessary for your life. It's a tough one.
keto in particular, like I can never eat a carb ever again. I'll eat totally fine. Well, newsflash here, your body actually converts fats and carbs into each other all the time.
Right.
So it's like your brain needs a certain amount of carbohydrates to function. That's just how it works. Unless you want your brain to shut down, then
it's all like, I know, like my business partner will say this. He's like, all of those diets have the same thing in common. They're getting you in a caloric deficit.
Right.
You just find the one that works for you, and that's why you think that one's better than all the other ones.
Yeah, 100%.
And it makes sense.
A lot of it's silly. A lot of people make a lot of money off silly, though. So
right? Let's try silly. Let's do silly if it works.
Yeah, right.
I think we've talked about this a little bit, is that a lot of people think exercise leads to injury, and like, okay, it certainly can. But we know, like, being sedentary can also lead to injury. And I want to see, like, what do you see in your field that leads to most injuries? Like, are most people coming in because they injure themselves doing something physical, or do you deal with a lot of problems from sedentary lifestyles?
Yeah, no, I would say the vast majority of people that I see are people that are dealing with long-term, it's been coming on for a while now, and then it finally just reaches a tipping point. Yes, I do see people that they did something, right? Like they did something exercising, or I love when the first snow falls because I keep a tally because people come in and are like, I hurt my low back shoveling. I'm like, of course you did. Like that stuff happens. But I would say the majority of people that I see, they come in and they're like, I have neck pain, I have mid-back pain, and I don't know why. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you do for a living? And they're like, well, I work at a desk. I sit at a computer for 8 hours a day. And I'm like, okay, well, do you do any type of like exercise consistently? Are you active? Well, I try, but I'm so tired by the end of the day, I usually don't. I'm like, okay, well, while you're at work, tell me about your posture. Do you sit the way that you're supposed to? Well, I try, but not really. So like, there's a pattern emerging already, if you can tell. Like, most of the stuff that I see is people just either don't know, or they don't care, or they, for whatever reason, they just don't take care of themselves long term. And that's where most of your problems come. And I tell people all the time, there is a risk to anything. Like, you're going to pay a price no matter what you do. Like every profession, that's why we ask what you do for a living when you come in, is because if you tell me what you do for a living, I can almost guess what your number, like 1-2 complaints are. And every job is like that. Even a chiropractor, like we regularly hurt shoulders and elbows. That's just something that happens being a chiropractor because of what we do. If you're a personal trainer, like I'm sure there are things you guys are prone to. Like it is what it is. So there's a cost to everything, but the cost of being sedentary is delayed, and so it doesn't seem like a big deal at the time. Right. Because they're like, oh, well, I sit on the couch, I feel fine. I eat junk food all the time, I feel fine. I never exercise. I'm 25 years old. I don't care. I don't need to. Like, I still haven't gained weight, so the cost comes due later. Right. But I would argue that if people would just exercise, and I'm not even talking about a certain form of exercise, but if people are just more active in general, ate a little bit better and took a little bit better care of themselves, we would probably eliminate upwards of like 75% of all common medical conditions, period.
Culturally, we don't seem to value those things. Though,
no.
Right? I'm just thinking about like college, like, and how much I like drank and didn't sleep, and like just like took no care of myself whatsoever in college, and it was like a badge of honor. Right. It was like, who can take the worst care of themselves?
Yeah. Who got the least amount of sleep this weekend? Yeah, it is kind of unfortunate. And our culture is worse than a lot of other places. America spends some of the most money on healthcare of any country in the world, and we have very poor outcomes, like versus how much money we spend. So our culture in general is not great. And obviously certain parts or different groups are going to be a little bit better about that, but in general, we're terrible. Like we just don't value the right things whatsoever.
I think it's hard. One of the things that we talk about in some of our like habit changing books and stuff that we read and work on with our members, is like you have to make it exciting or worthwhile. Right. It's like sometimes like, the burger tastes real good in the moment. The result you're going to get from not eating the burger is going to be way down the road, and it's harder to like. That's why you're talking about. I think when we first started talking about the why, right? Like having like a reason for doing things. Yeah. If
you have no like long-term reason or goal or anything, it's so easy to have short-sighted, desires. And of course the burger tastes better than the salad. It's just a fact. Okay. Like, but the goal is that if you take care of yourself overall, sure, have the burger. It doesn't matter. Like if you're overall doing really well, it's not going to do anything. It's fine. But the opposite is also true. If you're, for the most part, bad and you eat a salad every once in a while to make yourself feel better, that's also not going to do anything. Which I am not trying to say salads are excellent, by the way, because I do not like salads in general.
So one time when I was a kid, my mom told me, you can overeat baby carrots too.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So I just put them back and started eating chips again. Mm-hmm. So as much as I agree with you that one salad every once in a while isn't going to do anything, I'm not going to tell anybody not to go to that salad, because maybe they'll get more consistent if they start. Right.
Yeah. I just want to make sure I'm not getting caught in a trap of saying salads are the ultimate.
You a big fan of salads?
I like salads, but I also like salads with things in them that are not salad, like cheese and meat. And at that point, I don't even know if it's really salad. It's more of a game of hide and seek for the good ingredients, I think. But yeah, they're fine. I like salads.
I think I just like salads more now. It's a game of hide and seek.
I mean, I eat the lettuce too, obviously, but yeah, that is how my salad eating tends to go. I'm like, all right, where's the good stuff in here? Let me search for it.
See, I will do the opposite. I will eat the lettuce first, so that I have all the good stuff left over, and then just get to munch good stuff.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so you're the delayed gratification, and then every bite is delicious at the end. All right, I mean that's fair. Both strategies
all that lettuce is gone. You just got some meat and cheese on it.
Right.
I just need meat and cheese.
I will say, going back to what you said though about like the having to make it fun and exciting, like I'm sure you guys have this problem too, and I sometimes get frustrated with people that like because it's not always super fun or super exciting taking care of yourself, that people get either discouraged or bored. And I think because I'm around it all the time, like literally my entire life, career, whatever, is all about helping people be healthier. To me, when I get someone who's like, I don't really care, or like, they're like, that sounds too hard. Like, I almost instantly just like, what is wrong with you? Like, that's my knee-jerk reaction. But, I mean, life is different than like, everyone experiences it differently. Like, some people, that's just not their priority. Like, I know right now, stuff's kind of crazy going on in the world right now. Like, I've talked to people all the time, and they're like, yeah, I know I should do this thing, but the reality is I just can't right now. And that's something that needs to be respected too. But if you're just in fitness or health or whatever because you want it to be fun and exciting, you're going to be disappointed because sometimes it's not super enjoyable. Like, delayed gratification is tough.
Yeah. And I think like the more people you meet, the more you'll like learn different things, because it can be really hard to be like, why don't you just do what I say? Or like, why don't, but I also know sometimes I don't do what I say, right? So it's like I know where there's obstacles, there's resistance, there's things that have to be overcome, and sometimes you have to ask somebody, "Are you ready to overcome this?" Right. No, okay, we'll do what we can, and then you talk to me when you're ready to overcome this other 100%.
Any personal trainer who says they are perfect with their diet or exercise routine, like for the past, like maybe they've been really good lately, but like give them like a 20-year window, like they have messed up at some point. Every chiropractor has like not done the stretches or whatever that they recommend that you do. Like, no one is perfect. It's just not a thing.
You'd be stretching all day, probably.
Yeah, probably. That's all I would do all day.
So, okay, this is one I wanted to ask you. It's kind of big for our members. We see a lot of people who like just want to work hard. Mm-hmm. Like you can see on the board, we have like mobility and some smaller, like some stuff that we do to start the workout. You can't understand the way that anything's written. That's okay. But so we kind of ramp up from like warm ups, mobility, get people moving. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because sometimes one time we added some mobility, and one of our members said, "Can we just get to the good stuff?" Like they want to do the hard work. Right. And I get it, but I also know a lot of times the stuff you do before the hard work is like prep for, to make sure you don't kill yourself while doing the hard stuff. Right. So I want to see from your perspective in like as a chiropractor, it's like, what can you tell me about the benefits of that softer work, like stretching, mobility, foam rolling?
Right. Yeah. So if all you think exercise is the super high intensity, running around, you're sweating, whatever, like that is not all that exercise is. In my mind, the softer stuff is just as much fitness as the hard work is. So part of it, you got to mess with your outlook a little bit, because if you just think like, this is so boring, I hate stretching. Like,
right.
But, and we might talk about this about a little later too, but FMS, functional movement systems, one of their like phrase is move well, move often.
Yes.
And so before you can work hard, you have to determine, are you currently physically capable of working hard?
Right.
And even if you're in perfect shape, you've done everything you're supposed to do your entire life, I don't care who you are, you should still prep your body for harder work. You don't just immediately jump into an intense exercise. That's just not a good idea unless you're running for your life or something. You're not going to warm up and stretch before you sprint for all that you're worth. Okay. But the softer
we do talk about running from the bear.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're running from a bear, you should not warm up and stretch. You should just go. Right? But the softer work preps you and ensures that you're able to perform as much as you can without injury long term. And especially as we get older, because again, that downhill from 25 thing. But
that's really early to start going downhill. I don't think I like that.
That's what the statistics say. That does not take into account how much like you take care of yourself. And they look at stats that are kind of stupid anyway. But so that's a thing. But yeah, don't worry too much about that. But
so guys, you're over the hill at 25, not 40.
It's okay. I mean, everyone here probably is. I mean, we're all downhill.
Yes.
But yeah. So you can make, it doesn't need to be like a steep cliff though. It can be like a very slow, gradual downhill. It doesn't have to be straight down, but
sometimes I think I'm rolling.
Well, you can always change that too. Maybe you can change the trajectory of that line a little bit.
The speed at which you go downhill.
Yeah. But the older you get, the reality is your body does not recover as fast as it used to. You have to be careful about your warm-ups a little bit more. And so that stretching, that softer work, that mobility, all that stuff is what makes it so you can perform the hard work that you're so in love with long term. Like, so it's equally as important in my mind, but I understand why, especially if you haven't had to worry about that. Like, again, using the example of like a college student, like they don't stretch before they work out.
Right.
Like they don't warm up very long and they're fine. They have zero problems because either they're really lucky or whatever, but you can't do that forever. It's just not a thing. So, and even if you're 20, you shouldn't do that anyway, because you still need to prep your body to work hard. But
they can't tell it's one of those in the moment things.
Yeah, exactly.
They may not know in the moment that they should have prepped.
Right.
But they should have.
But yeah, it's just a fact that a warmed up muscle that is getting good blood flow, that's at temperature warm, is going to stretch and be more elastic and plastic than a cold muscle. That's a fact. So it's hard if you don't understand the benefit, or if you've never had an injury.
Right.
If you've never had a major injury, you're like, whatever. But if you have had something happen and it forces you to slow down and to warm up a little bit more, or to do more mobility work, or to do a lot of work to get you back to square one where you can get back to what you were doing before, if you've experienced that, you understand the benefit of slowing down a little bit.
Do you have a routine or anything you do outside of workouts, stretching or anything?
Yeah, I have some basic mobility work that I work on, because again, even though I do this stuff all day, I have issues.
Sure.
Thoracic rotation, so mid-back rotation, that's what that part of the spine is meant to do.
Right.
I struggle with that, not from a mobility perspective, but from something called somatic motor control, which means that I have all the range all day. Like, I'm not restricted in any way, but when I am weight bearing, when I'm doing activities, my brain, the way that it's trained my motor pathways to work, which this is really like down the rabbit hole discussion we could have, but it doesn't allow me to go to the full range, which can result in muscles overworking a little bit. And that's just something I know that I struggle with. So I am very proactive about, and it's kind of funny because I'll do stuff like if I'm going to do squats or whatever that day, I do like mid-back warm-up stuff to try and like get back to doing what I'm supposed to do. And I don't know if people ever like look at me weird, because sometimes I'll do it over by the squat rack. I'm like, what is he doing with his mid-back for squatting? but I just know that that's a problem that I have had in the past that I'm still working on. And so, yeah, I don't have necessarily a routine that I do every day. I do more of, okay, what's what am I going to be exercising this day? Like, what are my activities that I have planned? Has anything been bothering me? Did I wake up and something was tight? Stuff like that. So it's a little more reactive than just I have a routine, but I very much so do have, hey, if this happens, I do this. If this happens, I do this. If I have this activity planned, I'm going to do this for sure.
Okay. One thing that I read recently, they're talking about, again, we come back to Americans and how horrible we are, but we sit all day, and then we might go to a gym and do exercises that are very like specific, and you try to get good form and be in perfect patterns. So they said a lot of injuries end up happening when you're in imperfect patterns because we don't train our bodies to do that. So they were talking about like, play or different ways to get moving in a more like relaxed or different setting. Do you focus on stuff like that? Or?
Yeah, I do. So there's actually, again, I'm not going to go too in depth because this is another rabbit hole discussion, but there's a group it's called DNS, Dynamic Neuromuscular Stabilization, what that stands for, DNS.
Okay.
And their whole philosophy is when you are a kid, when you are developing as a baby, you learn how to move your body to achieve certain goals.
Yes.
A baby wants to roll over from their back to their stomach or from their stomach to their back. So they learn how to engage core muscles in order to be able to roll over, right? And then as you learn to like walk, for example, how do you start? Okay, well, first you have to be able to get into a sitting position. And then you have to be able to get into a kneeling position. And then you have to be able to get into a standing position, maintain balance. And then all of a sudden now you have to be able to maintain balance and step forward with one leg, where now all of a sudden only one point of contact with the ground, and you stay upright and you walk. So there's this progression that we do as kids that your brain learns what works and what doesn't. And it is a very, like, you don't use equipment as a baby.
Right.
Like as a kid, obviously. But as adults, we actually start to get rid of those things that we've learned as kids because we're very results oriented, and we can override those correct patterns by, like, for example, if you're going to reach for like a cup in a cupboard, do you walk until you're facing it? Your shoulders are square, your hips are square, you stabilize your core musculature, and then you reach for the cup, you bring it back down. Like, no. You're going to like stand on one leg and like reach and just grab it out of the air, which is, if we're talking like 100%, well, what's the best way to do it? The way you did it was far more prone to injury than the way where you actually established a foundation in a solid base, you engaged core musculature, you stabilized, and then you reach for it, right? So I agree that 100%, because people, they sit in the same positions all the time, and then they go to gyms where they do very isolated movements.
Yeah.
They like, I mean, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to use machines.
Right.
Which, if you don't know what you're doing, okay, maybe like get someone to help you, first of all. But if all you don't,
that.
Yeah, right, exactly. But if you don't know anything, you're going to use a machine, which is an incredibly, very isolated movement.
Right.
It helps you move the way it thinks you should, which, by the way, I've come across machines that are designed, I feel like, to hurt you.
Oh.
Like, they move you to terrible patterns. Like, anyway, it's awful. So they never get to functional movements. And in my opinion, if we're just talking about health, like if you have a specific goal, if you're a powerlifter, you're a bodybuilder, whatever, like you have to do those movements. That's different. But if you're just looking at health, you're much better off doing everyday movements that you will use during your lifetime and doing natural training than, oh, I went to the gym and I did bench press and then shoulder press. And I mean, and not to knock those activities or whatever, but it's just.
But it shouldn't be everything.
No. And so if you go and all you're doing is isolated work, you're missing out on so many things, like being able to use your lower and upper extremities in like synchrony better. Like there's so many things that aren't just, I'm trying to lose weight or get stronger, that you miss out on if all you do is accessory work.
So what I heard from this is we're definitely right to do the one exercise where we make our members roll over from their back to their front.
Yes, actually.
Even if they think it's silly and uncomfortable.
Yes, no, it's hilarious because I went to a DNS conference and they use it to prove a point where, and it's so funny because I was there was about, I think it was about 20 of us. And there was only, at the time I was in school, and there was only like 2 of us students, and then everybody else was a professor at the college I graduated from. Okay. So here I am with all of my professors that I'm like, oh, these guys are so smart and like so cool or whatever. But then we're all laying on the ground trying to roll over without using your arms and legs to like muscle it over. And like the vast majority of us couldn't do it, and none of us could do it without cheating a little bit, the way that they like ideally want you to do it. And so like, it just goes to show that even if you're a fit person or you're a healthy person or you're in the realm, you can still not do things 100% correctly. Like, you got to get back to basics for sure on a lot of things.
One of the things we do sometimes that drives people crazy, it's get back up drills. It's from Dan John, but you get down and you get back up, but then they'll do things like, okay, now put your right hand behind your back so you can't use that. Like different formulations.
Yeah, different limitations.
It's sometimes funny or fun, but it's also very much like a little grumbly, but like,
Yeah, I mean, well, it's because it's humbling because, and people don't like things that they're not good at. So you ask them to do something and they're like, because they're not good at it right away because it's difficult. Like, and that's why you should always like vary up like what you're doing. Like if the body adapts to the stimulus that you give it. If all you do is the same thing over and over and over, your body's eventually just going to be like, okay, whatever. We've done this 1,000 times. Like you have to challenge it. Otherwise you stagnate.
Which is incidentally why running helps people lose weight at first and then kind of not so much after they get used to it because your body, no, we do a fair share of mixing things up in here. So that's good. But so this is something that I have to ask you about because we've talked a little bit about barbells before. And I feel like it's somehow became this huge like holy grail of like real weight training is with barbells, and I can only assume this is because I don't know about you. I remember watching. Your childhood was a little later than mine, but we used to watch like bodybuilder competitions when I was a kid, and it was like bench press and squat, and like these were the things I was obsessed with. So like everybody wants to touch a barbell,
right?
And recently, someone said to one of our members that she's not doing strength training because she's not using a barbell. So I've heard you have some like really cool explanations about why a barbell isn't necessarily always the right tool. So I was hoping we could have a little bit of that conversation here.
So barbells are a tool. There are a ridiculous number of tools that we use for fitness. And some people are like, you don't need any tools. You should just do 100% like calisthenic body weight work. So, I mean, there's different trains of thoughts. But in my mind, a barbell is a tool that serves a certain function. And it is not necessarily better or worse than anything else like a free weight, a kettlebell, a machine, depending on what we're talking about. It's not necessarily better or worse than any other tool. Some of the problems with the barbell that I find, part of it, like you're saying, is kind of this like obsession with, it does mostly go back to like bodybuilding and powerlifting. And for a while, there was that weird era where like bodybuilding was fitness. Like that was the only training style that existed.
Thanks, Arnold.
Right. So, cause he was famous and that was like, he was in the media everywhere and everybody wanted to be huge and steroids were easy to get and like not illegal. Like, so that I think does stem from that. And so people are very much so like, oh, well, if you're not barbell benching, if you're not squatting with a barbell, like you're not lifting, you're not actually training. And so there is that, idea that sticks around, which is unfortunate. Some of the problems I have with the barbell are some of the things you use it for require pretty advanced mobility and advanced movement patterns before you should even touch it. I would never take someone off the street who has never done any type of formal exercise in their entire life and ask them to immediately go into doing a snatch or an overhead squat with a barbell. Even if they could somehow do it, I would never, even with no weight, I would never have you do that because it's a very difficult, complex movement to do correctly, right? So barbells, there's only so many things you can do with a barbell, right? So some of the things you do with a barbell are just not appropriate for a beginning fitness person or a beginning lifter. They're just not. You can work up to it, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do those things, but like Olympic lifting is one of those things, and not to bash on CrossFit or anything, but I see a lot of injuries from people that they went somewhere and that's the type of training they happen to be doing at the time. And so they just kind of get thrown in. Yeah. And so it's like, there's nothing wrong with a clean and jerk. There's nothing wrong with a snatch. But if you're not ready for it, you're setting yourself up for failure. Because, and with benching, one of the things I tell people is a barbell does kind of lock you in to certain movement patterns. And so if you don't know how to position your back and your shoulders and your arms correctly to use the barbell the way it's supposed to be, then you're more likely to hurt yourself than if you're using a machine or a dumbbell or doing a push-up. That's like, it just is what it is.
I heard this at Perform Better. Someone made a joke of the only thing that can kill you is the barbell bench press.
Yeah,
like the only exercise that can really kill you is the barbell bench press.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen way too many close calls. Or I mean, you can look videos all day about people dropping it on their necks and stuff, and a lot of that has to do with ego lifting, where people are going heavier than they should. They can't control the movement. So again, there's nothing inherently bad about a barbell, but I just think it's such a narrow view to say that if you're not using a barbell, you're not strength training, or if you're not using a barbell, you're not weightlifting. Like, that's just so wrong. And there are so many things, depending on what your goal is and depending on what you're doing, there are so many things better than a barbell, like, that are out there. So I think you were talking to me the other day about when you went to the conference and like the sandbags and lat activation stuff. Like,
it was so neat.
Yeah, there's like, the barbell is not the perfect tool. I don't know how it got elevated to the pinnacle of fitness is a barbell movements, but it's just not true. It's ridiculous.
Arnold. Just keep blaming Arnold.
I mean, he's as good as anyone. I mean, he's very in the public eye, and he did a lot of barbell movements because that's what they learned, and so it is what it is. So
kind of continuing on this exercise and injuries or whatever. So to ask you, what are some exercises that you commonly see injuries from, or things you wish people didn't do?
The one that always comes to mind when I get asked this question is if you have ever seen someone in the gym and they're like holding a dumbbell or a plate, like a 45-pound plate or whatever, and they're doing those things where they like bend side to side. That is what comes to my mind instantly, because people use it as like a filler exercise. They're like, okay, I'm on my rest period for this movement. I don't want to be lazy, which is also a stupid idea. We can talk about rest periods later if we want. But they're like, I need to be doing something. So let me do this weird like side bend thing with this plate. And they're trying to work like their QL and their obliques a little bit. But that one comes to mind because it actually creates shear forces on the lumbar spine, where if you've got these two guys on top of each other and you're doing that movement, that movement is not how your core is designed to operate. So it actually ends up creating like a shear force on the spine. And so I just had someone the other day, like, he's been a long-term patient. He comes in like every couple of months just to get tuned up. He came in a little bit earlier than he usually does. And he was like, so I don't know what I did, but like, I'm dying. Like, my back just like is terrible. And I'm like, okay, well, like, what have you doing? Like, have you done anything different recently? And it took me a little while to uncover. He had been in the gym. He'd been trying to get back into exercise stuff, and he'd been doing that movement. And that's one movement. I don't care why you're doing it. You can find something else that will do that same goal better. Trust me, like, don't do it. So that one comes to mind. But I feel like in general, besides those movements, because there are movements that I'm just like, someone made this up. It's crap. Like, it's terrible. But for the most part, there's not necessarily movements that are worse or things that I would never do. It comes down to like, what level are you at? And can you do this correctly? Can you do this safely? Can you do this in a controlled manner? And if not, then no, you shouldn't do it. Like, deadlifts are one that get a bad rep because
my former chiropractor, no whichever squat or deadlift.
Yeah. See, that's a little bit of an extreme view in my opinion, but
my guess is maybe he meant heavy and he just didn't say it. But
right, that's true. He could have meant like no one needs to, unless you're like a power lifter, no one needs to 1 rep max a deadlift or a squat or something. Maybe that's what he meant. But that's one movement that gets a bad rep because people do commonly hurt themselves doing it because they just don't, the form is not great, or they don't, again, mobility here. People don't have the mobility to get into the correct starting position. And the most dangerous part of the deadlift is getting it off the floor until the bar goes above the knees. That's just when your low back is at the most, quote unquote, like risk or the most disadvantageous position biomechanically. So if you're going crazy heavy and your form is terrible and you do that, and you may not even hurt yourself the first couple of times doing that. You may not hurt yourself for years. You could have terrible form and deadlift wrong and not have the correct mobility, not hurt yourself, but eventually it might happen. So it's things like that. There are movements that are a little bit higher risk and usually they correlate to the more functional movements.
Mm-hmm.
So like squat is probably one of the most functional things you can do. Like
Right.
how many times do you sit down and stand up during the day? Like people do it all the time. So obviously that's a real life movement that you need to be able to do. But people are like, oh, they take this compound movement, and again, barbell, but then they like, let's see how much weight I can do with it. And it's like, then form starts to deteriorate. Then they end up hurting themselves because their form falls apart. So there are movements that I will tell people instantly, I'm like, do not do that, please, ever again. But for the most part, I'm very open to what do you enjoy doing, what seems to work well for you. As long as you're doing it correctly, go for it.
Yeah. And I think, we do a lot of kettlebell deadlifts here, which means they're going to be lighter, so a little less chance for injury, I think, there. But also, after talking to you, I have noticed, like, when you talk about not everybody needs to deadlift, like, pull up from the floor, of, like, getting some boxes under kettlebells, because you can see, like, oh, their back is great. Oh, so let's only give them, the deadlift from that range of motion instead of where it starts to curl on them.
And it's interesting, too, because they're actually, I'm trying to remember who said this, and it'll come to me later, of course, as soon as we're done here, but there was a guy that his whole thing was, because you'll hear trainers, chiropractors, physical therapists, whatever, like you'll hear anyone from different parts of the fitness world or the biomechanical musculoskeletal world, and they'll be like, you should never go into lumbar flexion, which is that like leaning forward, like where the back is straight, and now it rounds. Like if your back is rounded during a movement, you're just asking for trouble and you're going to hurt yourself or whatever. And that's not necessarily true. There are people that actually are world-class deadlifters. They deadlift with a slightly rounded back. But if you watch them, their back doesn't move. Even though it's slightly rounded, it stays in that same angulation the whole time. So when you start getting into trouble is when you are moving in areas that you should not be during the movement. Like, especially, and we're talking about deadlifts, so we use that example, but most people don't have enough ankle dorsiflexion and hip mobility to be able to get low enough to grab a kettlebell or a barbell or something and maintain neutral spine.
Sure.
So those people need to work on mobility, because it's not necessarily that their back is the problem. It's that everywhere else is not mobile enough to get into the correct starting position.
And see, this is when we talk about those exercises that we do at the beginning of the workout that people are like, why are we doing this? I just want to lift heavy. I'm like, well.
Yeah, you can't just do that. So, so that's one that it's just you have to be able to get into the correct position. And that same guy I was talking about, I'll remember his name later, but he actually says that you should train on purpose in slightly disadvantageous positions, because your body it doesn't just instantly perform the way you would like it to without ever training it. Like, you just can't pick something up and instantly have perfect form or be great at it. There's a learning process like there is to everything. So his whole idea is not with a lot of weight, because again, like, you don't want to do something crazy, you're stupid, but he actually talks about how you should do certain movements in a quote unquote disadvantageous position in order to train your musculature, not to try and reinforce that behavior, but so that if that happens during mid-rep and you can't stop yourself, like you're already mid-rep, it's too late, your back is already rounded or whatever, like we're talking about, but that your body is not going to be injured because at least it can handle that type of pressure. And so that's an interesting idea, and I haven't incorporated that a ton into my personal exercise routines, but I have a buddy who he has pain while squatting like pretty much every time. And he's had his form evaluated by like 50 different people. And they're all like, okay, well, this is your problem. This is your problem. This is your problem. And he's like completely deconstructed his squat form like over and over and over. And even when it got to the point where everyone's like, yeah, that's perfect, he still had pain doing a regular squat. And then he kind of listened to that guy and on purpose started doing very, very lightweight, but he started doing movements with bad form, quote unquote, or bad positioning. And eventually, like, I don't think that's the route he needed to go in order to fix his problem, but eventually it fixed his problem because, and what I think happened is he finally just trained his core musculature to stabilize in disadvantageous positions to the point where even if his squat, for whatever reason, there's just something he's doing that's not 100% perfect, he finally trained to the point where he could hold himself stable so that even if it wasn't flawless, at least he wasn't shifting. Nothing was moving. It was stable while he was doing the movement, and then he didn't have pain anymore. So it is interesting. Like, we're always learning in the musculoskeletal world. Like, there's always new things to learn. Anybody who says they know exactly what your problem is and the perfect way to fix it and that they don't need to learn anything new is full of crap, because there's always something new to learn in the musculoskeletal world. There's just, you can never know enough.
Right. I mean, it's the same thing with fitness and nutrition. We talk about it all the time, about like how baby these sciences are compared to other studies.
Yeah. Yeah. Nutrition has not been a thing since like post-World War II.
Right.
Like, when we first actually found out what a carb, what a fat, what a protein like was, and then we figured out what amino acids were, and then we figured out what like different fatty chain acids or like.
I think we were doing better for ourselves before we knew, but
maybe before we knew all the ins and outs and everything. But yeah, like a lot of these fields are so new, and I always use eggs as my favorite example, because they're like, you shouldn't eat eggs because the yolks have dietary cholesterol. It's terrible. It's going to raise your cholesterol and lead to, atherosclerosis stuff. And then they were like, oh, okay. So it turns out dietary cholesterol has almost zero impact on your blood cholesterol.
Yes.
Like, oh, like,
but
we go back and forth all the time.
I still know people who are like, I can't eat eggs because of cholesterol.
Yeah, they're stuck on it. And there's always like a little bit of a delay between the science and then actually like educating people. And again, sometimes the science is just like flawed. Sometimes we get it wrong, and then we have to go back and fix it. And it takes forever to retrain people's ideas about food once they get them in their brain, which is really unfortunate. But
yeah, I was trying to help somebody with something, and they're like, "But this is the opposite of what you told me before." I'm like, "I know, just go with it." We're trying to get rid of that.
I can't imagine being like a nutritionist or like a dietitian where that's like all you do, or like you're involved in the research, because it must be so frustrating. Like, it's just different every couple of years. They flip flop on stuff. Yeah. Maybe we'll get it right eventually.
Right. This is good for you. This is bad for you. Well, I know, like the low fat thing, they thought that the fat was bad, and then they realized it was something else in those foods, and we took out the fat and added more of the thing that was actually damaging. Oops.
Right. We were like, fats are bad. Trans fat, let's do that. And now it's illegal because trans fats are not good for you. So we get it wrong, and which is why, again, like I try and just stick to like, for the most part, nutrition. If you just like kind of think about it, common sense like very rarely leads you astray when it comes to eating, because I mean, you can just kind of look at what you're about to eat. Like, if you just look at like a potato chip versus like a carrot or a thing of broccoli, like whatever, like you can kind of just, you can tell. And I'm not trying to say you shouldn't have potato chips, but I'm saying like, it's not hard usually. And I think people get too scientific, and it just becomes like really annoying really fast. Like, you can't obsess every second of every day over, am I eating the right thing? But, well, oh no.
I think that's sometimes people want to know all this information. And I'm like, look, there's some incredibly complicated information I can give you, but the steps to take are actually quite simple.
Right.
And then what we do a lot of here is like, those steps are simple. We all know they're simple, but not everyone does them. Right. So then it becomes, what's getting in your way? What's, and again, we go back to the whole America thing. How often have we been told that we should be eating Big Macs and treating ourselves with chips? And I mean, the marketing, the way that they're designed, the like food companies or whatever, the bliss points and all that stuff, it's.
Yeah. And I try not to be like cynical. I try and have like a positive outlook on most things, but I'm sorry. If they're going to make money off of you, they do not care about you to a certain extent when it comes to food. When it comes to like
absolutely
supplementation too. Like, how many companies have you seen that they're like, all you got to do is eat this and you'll get stronger, bigger, faster, whatever. Like, no, that's like a ridiculous claim, first of all. And second of all, like, then you come to find out later their ingredients, like where they're getting their stuff, is crap. Like, a lot of the times marketing and food, like, they don't actually care about your health.
Right.
And because a lot of it is not regulated by the FDA very well, like, they can almost say whatever they want within reason. So you got to be careful. And just because someone tried it and it worked does not mean it works. Anecdotal evidence is not super great when it comes to backing things up. But
see, we're back to bashing on America again, because a lot of that stuff is banned in other countries.
Again, like, we spend a whole lot of money more than other places on medical stuff, and we have worse outcomes. So take from that what you will, but that's just a fact. That's just numbers. So we're definitely not the best here. Not to say that everybody's obviously got it wrong, but we're a very consumer culture.
Yeah.
We're very sedentary overall. Like overall, we're just not great. It's true.
Right. And there are some ways in which progress has actually backfired a little bit on in terms of our bodies and how they work and function.
For sure.
So I know originally I was going to talk to you about all these things from our Perform Better conference, but it was like a month ago now, and I don't remember half of it anymore. But there's just a couple of things. Like obviously, someone brought up, or they talk a lot about different movement patterns, and mentioned like watching out for redundancy in programming, and that was something I wanted to bring up to you because my guess is that for your body, but like you don't want to wear it out, right? Or
no, yeah, your body hates doing the same thing over and over. Like repetitive movements are not great at all. And again, that goes back to your body is pretty predictable about what it's going to do. You do this is what's going to happen, right? It's like, I don't want to like say the body's like a computer, but at the same time, like if you do something consistently, your body will respond in a certain way. That's just like, that's how it works. So if you're constantly giving it the same type of stimulus, what do you expect to happen? If all you do, and we'll bash on barbell again, if all you do at the gym is like barbell bench press, and then when you're done with flat press, you go do barbell incline press, and then you go and do barbell decline press. And then like, if that's like your entirety of your chest workout, every single workout for years, at some point, you are going to either stagnate or you're going to hurt yourself because you're training the same way over and over and over. That's one of the main problems that I have with people who work at desks is that they sit in the same position. Even if you have good posture, I don't care. If you're not slouched or whatever, everything is right where it's supposed to be. But if you sit there for hours on end, even though it's a quote unquote good position that you're in, your body still hates that. Same thing with someone who, if you're standing and walking around and you never give your body a break from being on your feet, it doesn't like that either. Like, so it wants variety. And
we're bad at that, aren't we?
Yeah, we're terrible at that. Like, how many people, they have their job that they go to 5 days out of the week or whatever. They do the same thing every day at work, and then they go home and they do the same thing every evening. They sit or they whatever. Like, your routine is the same thing all the time. Like, we want consistency, which is not bad, but when you get stuck in the trap of the same thing over and over and over and over and over, like, your body just doesn't like that. Part of it goes back to, and this is a little more sciencey than some people may appreciate, but all the joints in your body that are synovial joints, which are like most of the ones we talk about, like shoulders, knees, elbows, ankles, your spine, like they get a lot of their nutrients from movement. They don't have very good direct blood flow. And so if you don't move in a variety of ways, you do not give them the nutrients that they need. And this kind of goes back to the people that are like, I can hurt myself exercising. Well, yeah, but doing nothing is actually, when I get someone in and I look at x-rays or whatever and their spine just looks like trash, I more commonly find that they have not been active than that they have been very active, right? So like people are like, oh, well, I don't want to cause more wear and tear or whatever. That's usually not how it works unless you're doing things incorrectly. Like if you are hurting yourself because you have bad form or whatever, like you have a very physically intense job that no matter what you do, you get hurt at work. Like that's different. But the people that do nothing because they're afraid of hurting themselves, their joints almost always deteriorate faster because they don't get nutrients and they don't get tested, more so than someone who does, like, they're active, they move around, they do stuff. Like those people, their joints look much cleaner. They have much less arthritis, which I hate that word, but they have much less wear and tear than someone else who is, even if you were like royalty or whatever and you're like, I never lifted anything, I never like had to walk, I was carried everywhere, they are going to age faster than someone who actually takes care of like the walks and does stuff for themselves. So it's completely flipped from reality is how people think about it. So
then I guess I would ask you, what do you feel about like trying to keep active or keep exercising when dealing with an injury though?
Yeah, so I will never, ever take someone, okay, I guess not ever, I shouldn't deal in absolutes, that's a thing. But sorry, anybody who's a Star Wars nerd, you get that. But anyway, but like, I don't ever want to take someone in and they're like, okay, I'm dealing with this problem, and say, okay, well, you know what then? You need to not do anything active whatsoever, period, until it's better and gone. That's like the worst thing, in my opinion, that you could tell someone. And if you think back, that's what they used to do with people when they would get like joint replacements, like
right.
knees, hips, or when you do heart surgery. It was 4 weeks of bed rest. Now, if you get a knee replacement, they have you walking the same day because they've realized, getting them back to normal function as quickly as possible leads to significantly better outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
So unless you come in with a broken bone, and I'm like, yeah, you shouldn't put pressure on that.
Right.
That's really the only time that I'm like, no, you shouldn't do any activity. You can almost always find something that you can do without making your symptoms worse. And some people are stubborn and they don't want to do the stuff that won't hurt them because they're like, no, but I'm used to doing this thing. I'm going to do it anyway, even if it doesn't hurt as bad as it used to. So I'm going to keep doing it. Like, that's not necessarily a great idea, but you can usually find something else that you can do that will accomplish maybe not the exact same goal, but very similar, without making what you're dealing with worse. And obviously part of it depends too on like what type of injury is it, how long is it going to be affected, like is it a small issue, is it a really big issue? That makes differences as well. But I almost always try and tell people, nobody knows your body better than you do. You're the only one that feels what you feel. You're the only one that experiences what you do. So part of it is like, you just have to self-regulate.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it makes you worse? If it does, maybe you shouldn't be doing that then, or maybe you should find something else, which kind of goes back to common sense again, but that's not a big thing nowadays. It's kind of a rare thing anymore, but I almost always will tell people to stay active because it helps your body. It speeds up healing time. If you are active overall, like, it is much, much better for you to just find an alternative, give yourself a break, especially if you hurt yourself doing something. Okay, well, maybe you shouldn't do that exact same thing that hurt you in the first place for a while.
Right.
You can go back to it, and then hopefully maybe if it was a form issue or something, you can fix that so it doesn't happen again in the future. But you're almost always better off finding at least something you can do to stay active. And I've heard all of the excuses, and I've dealt with all of the injuries, like, my knee hurts. Okay, well, have you tried cycling? Well, I want to walk instead. Okay, but that hurts your knee, so what about cycling? I don't want to cycle. Okay, well, what about like water aerobics?
This is me sometimes.
This is everybody sometimes, but like, it's like, okay, well, what about water aerobics? You know, like, we all have our favorite things that we do, but almost never is there like, I can't do anything. That's almost never the case. You can do something that's not what you would like to do maybe, but still you can stay active, and you should.
So, not to put you on the spot or anything, which I've been doing for over an hour now, but well, no, because we are going to have you come in and do a little workshop with our members. I just wanted to get a feel for, like, what do you think you're going to talk to them about, or what do you normally do if you're speaking?
Yeah, I try to make my appearances that I go places a little more interactive than just a lecture, because no one wants to go to that. It's boring. So usually what I will do is I'll talk a little bit about what it is that I do when people come in to see me for any issue that they may have. I kind of walk them through like a very shortened version of what I would do and what I would assess. But then I like to have a couple volunteers or something and do some sort of interactive like workshop with people where I've had people do the whole like laying on your back trying to roll over thing. There's a movement screen that I regularly do in the office that's designed more for people that have pain. Okay. It's actually also by FMS. It's SFMA, which is Selective Functional Movement Assessment. And it is a movement screen that was come up with by a chiropractor and a PT, actually, who both have like sports background and stuff. And they came up with it together through lots and lots of research over the years. And it basically is like, hey, if you are an average human being, you should be able to do these movements. And if you can't, then there's a reason why. And if you have pain during those movements, then we should figure out why. And it's kind of interesting because like, it's really fast, first of all, but people are sometimes surprised by what they can't do. They're like, oh yeah, I'm a super healthy, fit person. It's like, okay, well, can you do this? And they're like, no. So it's a little humbling at first, but then you show people, okay, well, here's what you need to work on then. And usually, in my experience, people become excited once you show them how they can improve. Yeah. Like, a lot of it is just they don't know. Like, they don't know what their struggles or weaknesses are. They don't know how to make those things better. So a large part of any patient that I have, unless they have serious issues that they need to do full time with like a PT or something,
Mm-hmm.
I give all of my patients exercises and stretches, and I ask how they're doing, and I show them stuff because I just think it's cool. Sometimes I don't have as much time as I would like to. Like, I can't do a full hour session. Like that's what a PT does. It's just the way insurance reimburses me as a chiropractor. It just doesn't make sense. So I can't do that. But I love like taking a person, walking them through a movement screen. They have problems with some movements, and then teaching them how to overcome those things so that they can overall function and perform better. So that's usually what I do to try and at least make it a little more interactive and fun. But it very much so what I do is very, very case-to-case basis. So there's some general advice that I can give, but a lot of it comes down to, okay, like what is your problem? Where are you having issues? Like the different reasons why they have it, that, you know, so it's a little more customized than you can do in a group setting, but there is lots of stuff I can't do that's just kind of like fun. And
I mean, obviously I think with our members, you'll get some lower back, some knees, some wrists sometimes. Mm-hmm. So the why might be a little different, but the what is, there's some commonalities in the what.
Yeah, I mean, once you're in the fitness world long enough, like you
everything
start
hurts,
to, well, hopefully not, but like, I mean, there's very common things, like especially like the way you guys do exercises and stuff. Like I know I've seen people from group settings that, you know, they have common issues because usually it's because they're not taught correctly or something, and then they're doing something slightly wrong. Like, I don't know, like wrists. It's pretty hard to injure a wrist, like, unless you're doing something wrong. Like, if you're doing everything correctly, like, it's just not an area that usually has issues unless you've had a trauma or you're doing repetitive movements incorrectly. So, like, usually it's just a matter of...
Well, what's funny is a lot of times it's people's carpal tunnel being aggravated by, like, push-ups or...
And like, push-ups hurt me. I'm like, no, your desk job hurts you.
Yeah.
Like, you just experience it while you're doing push-ups, so...
I mean, that was another thing they talked about in Chicago was, like, the really, like, pushing against the ground and that little, like you're turning a can to really, like... and so it's like if people don't... That's a very hard thing to get people to do or remember to do consistently.
Right.
So
yeah, there are lots of cues that don't make sense to people unless you like practice them. And I also hate because a lot of people are just taught wrong. Like I blame a lot of like, no offense to anybody who's listening if you're one of these, but like high school gym coaches, like I get people all the time who are like, I can't, like I'm squatting and I hurt my back or whatever, and I'm like, well, show me how you squat, and they're like, okay, and you can watch like as they're doing it, you can almost hear their thoughts. They're like, okay, make sure my feet are pointed directly forward, not turned out even a teeny bit. Okay, my feet have to be facing forward. My knees have to be like going right over my toes. Like they have been taught things that are not true for everybody, and so they just do stuff wrong. Like push-ups with your wrists like perfectly straight, like you're saying, they just do it like that, and they never learn how to actually like turn out the hands. They don't know how to load up through their actual arms correctly. Shoulders move a lot, so I see all the time people don't know how to position their shoulders in the correct spot to do push-ups. Like they're doing push-ups up here, and I'm like, no.
That tends to be me. I'm one of those people.
Gotcha.
I'm like afraid. I don't know. I have this fear that my head is so big and heavy that if I have my arms back, I'm just gonna like face plant. So I feel like I have to, right? Like, No, that seriously would go through my head. I'm just gonna tip over forward like one of those tipping birds. If I
mean, that seems like a logical fear. That makes sense then why you would want to do that. But
on the other hand, as Josh always tells me, how far are you going to fall when you're already in a push-up? Like, okay, fine.
Not far, a couple inches.
Yeah,
probably. But yeah.
All right, so I think I'm going to go ahead and end there, unless you have anything you want to ask me.
I think I'm good.
All right, cool. This is my least favorite part of every podcast. I have no idea how to end the darn things.
You're like,
Right, so I remembered what I'm supposed to do.
There you go.
Thank you very much for joining me today, Ruston.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
And thanks everyone for watching and listening. Remember, if you are a member of Fit Life Gym, Ruston is going to join us here in a few weeks to do a little workshop demonstration like he was just talking about at the end of this podcast. So I hope when we get that finalized, many of you come. Other than that, stay tuned for more episodes of Fit Life Journeys.